Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a truly massive concept: how a developing country's entire economic fate hinges on its population dynamics. Take India, for example. We know that the rate of economic development for any nation depends heavily on both its quantitative and qualitative growth, right? And we usually measure this growth in terms of national income, per capita income, and of course, population. But today, our lens is entirely focused on that last, absolutely critical element: the people themselves, and how they actively shape a nation's future.
Here is what we're looking at today: India's demographic reality, tracking population trends, the demographic transition, the population explosion, and finally, people as a resource.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, India's demographic reality and the sheer scale of the numbers. By definition, a population simply refers to the number of people living in a specific area at a given point in time. But to really grasp what that means for India, picture this: nearly 1 in every 5 people on Earth lives there. That's a staggering 17.5% of the entire global population. But here's the catch: that massive slice of humanity is squeezed into a tiny 2.4% of the world's land area. That is an immense concentration of human life in a relatively small geographic space.
To put a hard number on it, we're talking about 121.02 crores. According to the 2011 census, that colossal figure makes India second in the world, next only to China. It's actually a massive undertaking. India's population is meticulously measured once every 10 years through a nationwide census survey. And all of these vital statistics are compiled and published by the Office of the Registrar General and Census Commissioner of India.
Moving on to Section 2, tracking population trends, from ancient texts to modern policy.
You know, tracking these massive numbers isn't just some modern bureaucratic chore. It actually dates all the way back to the 3rd century BC with Kautilya's Arthashastra, which prescribed tracking populations as a state policy for taxation. Fast forward to 1872, and we see the first modern population census. Then we hit a really pivotal moment in 1921, widely known as the Year of Great Divide. Prior to 1921, growth was actually sometimes negative because of epidemics, but after 1921, growth turned consistently positive. This century of tracking eventually paved the way for structured modern governance, like the Comprehensive National Population Policy introduced in the year 2000.
Before we get into the theories behind this growth, we gotta understand one fundamental metric: the survival rate. It's super simple. It's just the difference between the birth rate and the death rate, but it's the ultimate bottom line, showing the actual, undeniable rate of population growth in a country.
Okay, Section 3, the demographic transition and the mechanics of population growth.
Let's look at one of the oldest theories out there. Back in 1798, Thomas Robert Malthus proposed something kind of alarming. He argued that populations naturally explode in a geometric progression, 2, 4, 8, 16, while our food supply only creeps up in a slow arithmetic progression, 1, 2, 3, 4. This creates a terrifying imbalance. Malthus basically believed this required preventative checks, like late marriage, or else nature would enforce positive checks, like natural calamities, to just wipe out the excess and restore balance. Pretty grim, right?
But a much more modern and applicable framework is the theory of demographic transition. Historically, India went through a classic second stage of development here. From 1901 down to 2011, economic progress, industrialization, and way better healthcare caused the death rate to absolutely plummet, dropping from 42.6 all the way down to just 7.48. But the birth rate remained stubbornly high for much longer before it slowly started to decline. That massive, widening gap between birth and death rates, that is exactly where rapid growth happens.
Which brings us right to Section 4, the population explosion, visualizing the pressure.
Think about what a population explosion actually feels like on the ground. Imagine a typical Jeep back in 1961, comfortably carrying a few passengers. Fast forward to 2011, and picture that same Jeep completely overwhelmed, just overflowing with people. That was the reality. Particularly between 1971 and 2001, India's annual population growth rate hovered over 2%. It put immense, literally visible pressure on the country's infrastructure, its agriculture, its land, and its basic amenities.
So why did the birth rate stay so high for so long? Well, it was driven by some pretty rigid socioeconomic realities. Widespread illiteracy meant older attitudes toward family size just stuck around. There was a nearly universal expectation of marriage at a young legal age and a really strong societal preference for a male child, often called son metapreference. Add in a joint family system where individual financial burdens were shared and widespread poverty in an economy overdependent on agriculture. In that setting, more children were simply seen as more hands for field labor.
On the flip side of the equation, why did the death rate drop so incredibly fast? Because of massive, rapid leaps in healthcare and disaster management. Infant and maternal mortality plummeted, and simple but revolutionary programs like midday meals in schools helped aggressively wipe out malnutrition. Plus, the establishment of dedicated agencies like the NDMA in 2005 meant the country was far better equipped to manage natural disasters and actually save lives.
This complex balancing act brings us to our final and perhaps most important perspective today. Section 5. People as a resource, the ultimate pivot.
When looking at all this data, we really have to pause and ask ourselves a fundamental question. Is a massive, exploding population strictly a liability and a burden for a developing country? Or, if managed correctly, can it actually be transformed into a nation's absolute greatest economic asset?
Enter the demographic dividend. This is widely considered a real game changer. A demographic dividend occurs when the proportion of working-age people is exceptionally high compared to the dependent population. This indicates a massive potential of human resources that, if tapped into, can contribute incredibly to economic growth.
Back in 1990, the UN Development Program hit the nail on the head. Human development is the real wealth of a society. When a massive population is healthy, educated, and motivated, they aren't a burden at all. They become the innovators sparking new research, the highly skilled workers driving productivity, and the solid foundation of political stability. Ultimately, human development embraces the enlargement of all human choices, enriching the whole society from the ground up.
But, and this is crucial, to actually harness this dividend, the focus has to shift heavily to population education. Now, this isn't just about teaching people the stark statistics we've covered today. It is essentially about human resource development. It aims at developing the vital values and rational, responsible attitudes required to take care of both the quantity and, far more importantly, the quality of a population's lives.
As we've seen throughout this explainer, a massive population is far more than just a census number. It is the very engine of potential economic development. It leaves us with a truly provocative thought to ponder. How will a developing nation effectively transform its billion-plus people from a daunting demographic challenge into its greatest economic superpower? It's perhaps the defining question for the global economy in the decades to come. Thanks for joining me on this journey through the numbers, and keep asking the big questions.